Hi, my name is Allison Losciavo, and I decided to do my Watson 2 project using data surrounding the 2012 election. And what that consisted of is a comparison between population and how the states voted, also regarding crime, regarding right to work, regarding the gun laws that were in each state. So I hope you enjoy the comparisons as I have enjoyed them. And well, here we go. Hello. As I was stating before, I wanted to use the data from the 2012 election and just look at any possible political drivers. Using the IBM Watson Analytics, this brought up a few different scenarios and then allowed me to compare and see if there were any relatable or predicting data. In the top left corner, I have the breakdown between crime and how the state voted for the 2012 president. In the top right corner, I have the values of population and how they compare by voting for the 2012 president. In the bottom left corner, I have how do the values of the 2012 president votes compare with states that were considered right to work and states that were not considered right to work. And finally, in the bottom right corner, I have what are the values of electoral votes for each state. And although it doesn't give a number, it does identify the states, and in those the bubbles, they are relevant to the size of the electoral votes in each state. So going to the first top right corner, the breakdown of crime by the 2012 president, I wanted to get a visual of the difference in the crime rates to compare in areas where the Electoral College won out either red or blue in each state. I will say I found it interesting just to see that in the states that voted Republican had a higher crime rate, since previously I would have thought it was more, or I'm sorry, in more states that voted as a majority Democratic. It is worth noting that in this particular election, the Democratic president-elect won by a landslide both in popular and electoral votes. Now, did the population count match up with the presidential outcome? Since our next president is decided by the electoral votes and not the popular vote, except for, within each state, who then, decides based on the popular vote who is going to receive the electoral votes. But I also wanted to get a reading how the population voted and if it represented the electoral vote in this particular 2012 election. Not surprisingly, the majority of the population did vote for the Democratic nominee, and also received the electoral votes, which provided the same outcome. There is quite a difference in votes this particular election, as you can see with nearly half of people voted for, or just a little over half, I should say, voted for the Republican nominee versus the Democratic nominee. Next, is there a relation between the right to work and party affiliation? I wanted to see a comparison as to the right to work regarding the two parties of people who voted for in the 2012 presidential election. This is to see whether or not the state that is yes for right to work swings either more Democratic or Republican, and the same goes for a state who would vote no. I will say I was surprised to see such a large gap in the states that did vote no in terms of Democratic and Republican affiliation. I thought it may have been a little bit closer to the yes columns, although even with that said, the yes column did also have quite a bit of a right to work. So this tells me that generally a democratic state is going to be a state that also does not have, it's not considered right to work, or it doesn't have, it doesn't carry that type of political affiliation. So lastly, I'm sorry, I jumped too far. The last slide was how valuable is the electoral vote? This one I found most interesting, and just crunching some numbers after kind of seeing that there were a few states that really stood out, such as California, Texas, New York, Florida, and then a little more, but not as much. You have Pennsylvania, Michigan, Illinois, Georgia, Ohio, and North Carolina, as well as New Jersey. I did run the numbers, since you do technically need 270 electoral votes to win the election, and calculated how many states would that require if you took the states that had the biggest populations. And in looking at this, I find it interesting that if just 12 states coordinated their popular vote, they could control each presidential election, as they total 270 electoral votes exactly, and that was with taking just the 12th one as like a state that only needed 3, or that only had 3 electoral votes. One that wouldn't have more would just put it over. And since 270 is needed to decide the election, I found it interesting that just 24% of all 50 states could decide an election each and every time. And thinking about it, if you have 24 parts of the United States determining this outcome. So, in regards to the data as a whole, with the political relation data dashboard, there were some things that I would think could be used as a predictor. I would say the right to work was a pretty strong indicator when you're talking states that do not have a right to work statute, or I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm stating this correctly, but if they voted no for right to work, or if that's just how the state is, if there's not a right to work in the state, then that state is most likely going to turn out to be a democratic state. Whereas there is a more, I wouldn't say balanced, but it somewhat is when you're talking if the state is yes for right to work. You may have more of a democratic outcome versus Republican. I would like to, in the future, maybe compare these results with the 2016 election, just to see what data has changed, especially with the popular vote compared with the electoral vote, because at this point the popular vote is, I think, 3 million for the Democratic nominee, and more than the Republican nominee. However, because we do base our elections on the Electoral College, the Republican nominee was the winner. So I hope you enjoyed the data comparisons and found this useful as I did, and thank you very much.